Through the fog that hangs over the river, a lone splash of N or can be heard. It breaks the silence like a shot in the void and makes hearts stop. Deep down, you know that this is not just a boat and not just a boatman, it is destiny moving with the current, and on board is something that will change the world forever. But what if the sketch of your destiny is already lying at the bottom of the boat? And what if the wanderer who controls the current is none other than the emperor himself? The moon had fled behind a ribcage of clouds, leaving the black river to guess at its own edges. Wind clawed the reeds. They hissed like gossip against the hull of the lone skiff. The boatman, Jiro, stood ankle-deep in bilge, fingers curled around a splintered or whose blade had been whittled thin by years of scraping sandbars. His coat was more patched than cloth, the threadbare seams glowing faintly where starlight touched them, as if the garment itself were trying to remember color. A lantern swung from the bow, its flame shrunk to a blue bead by the cold. It swung toward the opposite bank and revealed nothing, only the river's black back heaving like a beast pretending to sleep. Then, between one gust and the next, the stranger appeared. He wore a cloak the color of wet ashes, hood drawn so low that Jiro saw only the glint of eyes, sharp, quick, like flints struck in darkness. The stranger carried no baggage but a long roll of parchment tucked beneath one arm, its edges fluttering as though impatient to be read. He stepped into the skiff without waiting for an invitation. The boards creaked once, accepting him, and the lantern flame straightened as if curious. Jiro cleared his throat. Rivers high tonight, currents angry, fares usually a copper. But he patted the pocket inside his coat and felt only the hole through which coins had slipped months ago. "I've no need of coin," the stranger said. His voice was river smooth, carrying neither echo nor accent. "Row." Jiro hesitated. In the stories his grandmother told, to ferry a man across water without payment was to bind your fate to his. But the village behind him was already half-starved. Pride tasted like river mud in his mouth. He dipped the oar. The boat slid away from the reeds with a sound like silk tearing. Water rose against the hull, dark and thick, carrying the scent of iron and drowned leaves. Jiro rowed in silence, shoulders burning, breath pluming white. Each stroke left a brief silver scar on the surface before the river closed over it. Halfway across, the stranger unfolded the parchment. Jiro caught a glimpse, lines sketched in charcoal. The outline of a face, strong jaw, eyes set deep beneath heavy brows. His own face. The stranger's gloved hand moved swiftly, shading the hollows beneath the cheekbones, adding the knot of worry between the brows that Jiro saw every morning in the cracked mirror above his washbasin. "Why draw me?" Jiro asked, pulse loud in his ears. "To remember the man who asked nothing," the stranger replied. He tore the sketch free with a soft rasp and held it toward the lantern. Flame licked the edge. The paper curled, blackened, and the wind carried the flake of ash over Jiro's shoulder into the dark. The boat touched the far bank with a gentle shudder. Reeds parted, revealing a path lit faintly by starlight. The stranger stepped ashore, cloak brushing Jiro's knee like a whispered apology. He turned once. "Debt is heavier than water," he said, and then the night folded around him and he was gone. Jiro stared after the empty path, heart drumming against his ribs. The lantern flame guttered, throwing his shadow across the skiff like a second oarsman who had no intention of rowing back. He dipped the blade again, but the river felt different now, denser, as though the stranger's weight had not left the boat but had merely become invisible. Behind him, the village slept under a roof of thatch and worry. Ahead, only the river's slow breathing. Somewhere in the darkness, a charcoal smear of ash floated on the current. An unfinished portrait, a promise, a warning. Jiro rode home with the taste of soot on his tongue, not knowing that the river had already begun to remember his name. Dawn cracked red across the paddies, the color of a split lip. Jiro was knee-deep in mud, coaxing a lame ox toward higher ground, when the first drumbeat rolled down from the ridge. It wasn't festival rhythm. It was iron on hide, slow, deliberate, the heartbeat of something that did not intend to stop. He straightened. Far off, beneath the drum, came the ring of harness, the creak of cart wheels, the disciplined crunch of boots on frostbitten earth. Smoke rose, not hearth smoke, thin and vertical, but broad, deliberate plumes that smudged the sky like careless calligraphy. By the time he reached the village square, every door had already been marked. Scarlet X's bled through the pale wood of lintels, still wet, dripping like fresh wounds. Soldiers in lacquered armor moved among the houses, silent as wolves. One hammered a notice to the communal oak. The parchment snapped in the wind, revealing the imperial seal, a dragon devouring its own tail. Villagers gathered, clutching children, chickens, bundles of rice. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft clink of armor and the lowing of cattle who understood nothing except that familiar hands were shaking. Jiro's daughter, May, slipped her fingers into his. 8 years old, all elbows and questions. She whispered, "Papa, are they taking our house?" He could not answer. His tongue felt thick, useless. His eyes found the notice. By decree of the celestial emperor, this valley shall be raised for the summer palace of eternal solitude. Compensation shall be granted. Resistors forfeit life. The proclamation was dated 2 moons ago, long before any drum had sounded. A captain stepped forward, helm reflecting the sickly sun. 3 days, he said. Pack what you can carry. Burn the rest. Behind him, 2 soldiers unrolled a scroll, an architect's rendering of what would rise where their fields now lay. Tiered pavilions of white stone, lakes dredged into perfect crescents, ornamental bridges arched like frozen smiles. In the corner, a tiny charcoal sketch. Jiro recognized the quick, economical strokes of a man's face, his own. Labeled simply Boatman, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Some stared at the drawing as if it were a death mask. Others looked at Jiro with something between accusation and awe. Reverend Paul pushed through, Bible clutched like a shield. "This is God's land," he declared, voice quavering. "You cannot." The captain backhanded him. Paul stumbled, spectacles flying, pages scattering across the dirt like white moths. No one moved to help. Jiro felt May's grip tighten. Her palm was damp, trembling. He wanted to promise her that everything would be all right, but the words tasted like ash. Instead, he lifted her onto his hip, feeling her small bones through the thin fabric of her coat, and turned toward home. The path back was littered with petals of red paint where soldiers had flicked their brushes against doors. His own X glared above the lintel, still wet enough to smear when he reached to touch it. Inside, the single room was cold. The hearth had gone out sometime in the night. On the table lay the ox's yoke, cracked and useless, and beside it a half-finished carving of a crane he'd promised May for her birthday. He thought of the stranger's parting words, "Debt is heavier than water," and for the first time understood the weight. Outside, dusk crept in purple layers. Soldiers had begun driving stakes at the corners of each plot, measuring rope, marking where walls would rise. Their laughter carried across the paddies, sharp as winter stars. May tugged his sleeve. "Papa, the river's rising." He looked. Indeed, the Black River, swollen with early snowmelt, lapped higher than he'd ever seen, black and glossy, reflecting torchlight in broken shards. For a moment it seemed the water itself was reaching up to reclaim the land. That night the village held no feast, no fire. Families huddled in shuttered rooms, listening to the distant clang of surveyors' tools. Jiro sat on his threshold, sharpening the or he'd once used to ferry the stranger. Each scrape of the blade sounded like a question. What debt? What return? Just before dawn, a wind came down from the mountains carrying the scent of pine and something else. Wet charcoal, the ghost of a burned sketch. On the notice board, the drawing of his face had torn free and now lay trampled in the mud, the features half dissolved by dew and boot prints. He picked it up anyway, folded it small, and slipped it inside his coat next to his heart. Somewhere beyond the ridge, drums began again. Slow, certain, inevitable. The village would be gone by the next moonrise. But the river, Jiro knew, remembered everything it carried. And the stranger's debt had not yet been paid. The summons arrived before the frost had melted from the thatch. 2 riders in vermilion cloaks dismounted at the well, their horses' breath pluming white in the dawn. One carried a lacquered baton, the other, a scroll sealed with the imperial dragon. They did not speak to the village headman. They did not speak to anyone. They hammered the baton 3 times against Jiro's warped door and left the scroll wedged beneath it like a blade. Inside, the paper trembled in Jiro's hands. The ink was still wet, each character a coiled whip. Boatman of the Black River. Present yourself at the Vermilion Gate by the next new moon. Bring the oar you rowed that night. The Emperor will question you. Disobedience is death. Below the seal, a smaller mark. Charcoal hurried. A tiny boat sketched in 3 strokes. May watched from the doorway, eyes wide enough to hold the whole sky. Papa. The Emperor knows your name. Jiro could not feel his legs. The oar leaned against the wall where he had been sharpening it to a point, half weapon, half promise. He touched the splintered handle. It pulsed like a second heart. 3 days later he walked the imperial road, the oar across his back like a sword he did not know how to wield. Frost crusted his sandals. Each step cracked the thin ice of puddles, sounding like bones breaking. Farmers bowed low as he passed, whispering, "That is the man the Emperor summoned." Their awe tasted like vinegar, equal parts reverence and fear. The capital rose sudden and obscene from the plains. Red walls taller than memory, roofs tiled in gold that caught the sun and flung it back like a slap. Inside the Vermilion Gate, scents assaulted him. Sandalwood thick as fog, the copper tang of incense burners, the cloying sweetness of courtiers' perfume. Every surface shone. Marble floors that reflected his muddy footprints, silk banners rippling like living water, guards whose lacquered armor clinked like wind chimes fashioned from beetle shells. A eunuch in robes the color of fresh bruises led him through corridors that twisted like eels. Courtiers glanced up from game boards and lowered their fans, studying him as if he were a new species of curiosity. This weather-beaten man carrying N or through halls designed for silk slippers and scented handkerchiefs. At last, a pair of vermilion screens loomed, embroidered with dragons that seemed to breathe. Behind them, a silhouette, tall, still, haloed by lamplight. No face, only the suggestion of power so absolute it bent the air. "Kneel," the eunuch hissed. Jiro's knees bent, but before they touched the cold stone, a voice floated out. Quiet, river deep, unmistakable. "Let him stand." I remember his back was straighter than this. The screens parted a hand's breadth. Light spilled through, catching on something small held between gloved fingers. A scrap of paper, edges curled, charcoal half rubbed away. Yet the outline of a face remained. His face. A low murmur rippled through the hidden courtiers. Jiro felt every gaze settle on him like hot coins. The silhouette leaned forward, just enough for lamplight to catch the corner of a mouth. Not cruel, not kind, but measuring. "You rowed me across the Black River on the night the moon hid its face," the voice said. "You asked no coin. I asked no name. Yet here we are." Jiro's throat worked. "The river remembers, Majesty." A pause, so vast the incense seemed to freeze mid-swirl. "And what does it remember?" Jiro looked at the scrap of paper, then at the silhouette, and understood the question was not about water or oars. It was about the weight of a debt unpaid, a kindness unclaimed, a village still marked for erasure. "It remembers," he said, voice steady now, "that some things cannot be measured in gold or in blood. It remembers mercy, and it remembers the man who still carries that mercy like N or across his back." Silence. Then, softly, almost wistfully, "Show me the oar." Jiro lifted it. The guards flinched, hands to hilts, but no order came. The silhouette studied the blade scarred, salt-stained, sharpened to a point that could split a kingdom or plant a field. "Set it down," the voice commanded. Jiro laid it across the marble. The sound it made, wood against stone, echoed like a gavel. From behind the screens, a gloved hand extended, palm up, not to strike, to help. "Come closer, boatman," the Emperor said. "The river is not finished with either of us." Jiro stepped forward, knees trembling but unbent, into the circle of light where mercy and judgment waited like twin blades. The palace foundations were already being laid. At dawn, ox carts groaned up the valley road, each loaded with quarried stone the color of bleached bone. Soldiers unrolled hemp ropes and drove bronze stakes into the soil that had once fed 3 generations. A surveyor in a crimson sash stood atop the ridge, arms outstretched as if embracing the whole valley, shouting measurements that scattered startled herons from the reeds. Jiro watched from the village common, May's hand clamped around 2 of his fingers. The stake nearest their house bore the imperial crest. Its shadow lay across her feet like a promise of dawn that would never come. In 2 days the first terrace would rise. In 5 their roof tree would be ash. Then the drums stopped. A single rider burst through the gate, no armor, only the same vermilion cloak Jiro remembered from the summons. The messenger slid from his horse, breath white in the cold, and raised a scroll sealed not with the dragon but with the emperor's personal phoenix. The valley fell so silent Jiro heard the river whispering its old debt over the stones. The captain of the guard knelt. The surveyor knelt. Every soldier knelt, bronze stakes clattering like dropped spears. The messenger read, "By decree of the celestial emperor, the valley of the Black River is spared. The summer palace shall rise on the northern bluff instead, where the wind sings of cedars and no hearthfire need be quenched. Let it be known that the emperor remembers mercy as keenly as sovereignty. Let the boatman Jiro be given title to the valley in perpetuity, and let his or be set in marble at the palace gate as reminder that the lowliest hand may steady the mightiest throne." A roar went up. Not triumph, not yet, but the raw, animal sound of a people given back their lives. Old women wept into aprons. Children who had been told to pack only memories now spun in circles, scattering rice like confetti. May tugged Jiro's sleeve so hard the fabric tore. The soldiers rose slowly, confusion softening their faces. One by one they uprooted the stakes. The brass dragon crests glinted once in the sun before disappearing into saddlebags. The surveyor rolled his parchment without a word, the red lines of future halls now meaningless squiggles. By midday the valley looked like a battlefield where no blood had been spilled. Drag marks scarred the earth where stones had been hauled away. A single ox, unyoked, grazed serenely amid the trampled wheat. Gyros, or retrieved from the common shed, stood propped against the well, its blade still nicked from river stones, now garlanded with wild asters by May and the other children. Yet the valley had changed. Where stakes had stood, holes remained, small dark mouths opened to the sky. The soil smelled sweeter than before, as if it had been turned by invisible hands whispering apologies. At twilight the emperor's own retinue arrived. Not the army, but a quiet procession. 2 white-robed scribes, a mason with a chisel of jade, and a girl no older than May carrying a pot of lacquer the color of midnight. They built no palace. They built a single gatepost of river stone no taller than Jiro's shoulder. Into its face they inlaid the oar upright, blade skyward, handle sunk deep, so that from a distance it looked like a mast awaiting wind. The mason asked Jiro to place the final stone. Jiro's hands shook, but the block slid home with a soft click, like a word spoken after years of silence. The scribes inscribed beneath, "Here the river remembers." Night settled. Fires sprang up on the common. Someone produced a skin of plum wine and passed it hand to hand. Soldiers who had come to raise the village sat beside farmers who had expected to die, sharing rice cakes and stories of homes left behind. The captain toasted Jiro, eyes wet. "I have daughters," he said simply. "I know the weight of mercy." Later, when the moon climbed, Jiro walked to the riverbank. The water, black and glossy, slid past with no stake to measure its width, no palace to reflect. He knelt and dipped his fingers. The current curled around them, warmer than he remembered, almost grateful. Above him, the new gatepost stood sentinel. The oar's blade caught moonlight and threw it across the water in a thin silver line that reached all the way to the opposite bank. The same path he had rowed the stranger in darkness. For the first time he noticed tiny carvings along the handle. Cranes in flight, rice sheaves, a child's open hand. May's voice drifted from behind. "Papa." The river's singing. He turned. She stood barefoot on the stones, holding a lantern fashioned from a gourd. Its light laid a golden circle on the ground, small, defiant, perfect. He took her hand. Together they walked the length of the village, past houses that would wake tomorrow to the same dawn, past fields that would bear rice instead of marble. The river kept its ancient voice, but now it carried two names. One spoken by an emperor, the other whispered by every reed that bent toward the water. When they reached home, Jiro hung the empty yoke on the wall. It would never again bite an ox's shoulders. It would never again remind him of what he could not afford to lose. Outside, the gatepost's shadow stretched across the path like a bridge no one would ever need to cross. Somewhere in the dark, a heron called, once, twice, then lifted into the sky, wings silvered by moonlight, carrying the sound of mercy over the valley like a bell that never needed to be struck again. The first harvest moon rose huge and copper above the black river, so bright it bleached the new rice silver. Lanterns bobbed along the dikes like fallen stars, and every path through the paddies smelled of crushed lemongrass and wood smoke. Children ran ahead of the reapers, chasing fireflies into the warm dark, their laughter echoing off the water like skipped stones. At the center of it all stood the gatepost. River stone warm from the day's sun, the ore inset so perfectly that wind sometimes hummed through the grain. May had appointed herself its keeper. Each dawn she wiped dew from the blade with the hem of her tunic and left tiny offerings. 3 red berries, a crane feather, once a perfect snail shell that glimmered like mother of pearl. The offerings never lasted. Swallows carried off the berries, wind took the feather, but the shell remained balanced on the oar's tip for 7 days, a small covenant between earth and sky. Across the fields, former soldiers bent beside villagers they had once come to evict. Their armor was gone, traded for straw hats and callous palms. The captain who had toasted Jiro now taught May's friends how to angle a sickle so the rice fell in clean arcs. When the work was done, they sat on the dike sharing rice wine from tin cups, singing songs that belonged to no particular side. Ballads of rivers and homecoming, melodies the wind caught and carried downstream. Jiro watched from the skiff he had rebuilt with his own hands, a lighter craft now, its ribs cedar instead of cypress, its prow painted the same blue May chose for her festival kite. He no longer rowed for coin, he ferried memories. Each trip carried a basket of first-cut rice to the far bank where a small shrine stood. Nothing grand, only 3 stones and a bowl of river water, but every traveler paused there, palms together, whispering gratitude to whatever force had turned decree into deliverance. On the 15th night of the harvest, the village gathered at the gatepost. They laid the first sheaves of rice in a circle, petals of gold against the dark stone. Old Yoon, who had lost her husband to the tax collector long ago, lit incense that curled like question marks into the moonlight. "We plant what was almost taken," she said, voice cracked but steady. "We harvest what was given back." May stepped forward, carrying a bowl of river water so clear the moon floated inside it. She tipped the bowl. Water ran down the oar's grain and pooled at its base, darkening the stone like fresh ink. "The river remembers," she declared, repeating the words she had heard Jiro speak to the moonlit water months earlier. Around her, voices rose, not in prayer, but in promise. Later, when the lanterns guttered and children were carried home on shoulders, Jiro returned alone to the bank. The moon hung low, a polished coin slipped from heaven's pocket. He knelt, pressing his palm to the gatepost's cool surface. Beneath the lacquer he traced the faint carvings. Cranes in flight, rice sheaves, a child's open hand. In the center, almost invisible, a tiny boat with 2 figures, one cloaked, one rowing. A ripple caught his eye. Far out, moonlight stitched a silver path across the river, the same path the stranger had once crossed in darkness. Jiro rose, untied the skiff, and pushed off. The current welcomed him, gentle now, as if the river itself had learned to breathe slower. He rowed without effort, or dipping and lifting in a rhythm older than language. Midstream he paused. The water here was deep enough to swallow a man, yet he felt no fear. Instead he listened, to the hush of reeds, to the distant laughter of villagers banking coals for the night, to May's voice drifting across the water as she sang to the fireflies. Each sound was a bead on an invisible thread, binding past to present, mercy to memory. He dipped his fingers. The river was cool, alive, carrying silt and secrets downstream. Somewhere beneath the surface, he imagined the original or resting. Splintered, perhaps, but not lost. He spoke aloud, voice low, words meant for water alone. You spared us. We will spare others. Behind him, the gatepost silhouette rose against the stars, the upright or a mast without sail, a promise without end. Lanterns on the far bank blinked once, twice, then steadied signals between those who had learned that mercy was not a gift but a covenant, renewed each time the moon turned full. Jiro turned the skiff homeward. As he neared the shore, May ran to meet him, lantern in hand, light swinging in golden arcs. She pressed something into his palm. Another crane feather, soft as breath. He tucked it beneath the oar's lashings, where wind and water would polish it smooth. Together they walked the dike path, moonlight paving their footsteps in silver. Behind them the river kept its ancient voice, but now it carried two names forward, one spoken by an emperor, the other whispered by every reed that bent toward the water. And in the hush between heartbeats, it sounded like a lullaby the world had been waiting centuries to sing.